Eastern Conference. Let's move along with our coverage from the Houston perspective. Alykhan Bijani from The Athletic covers the Rockets for The Athletic. I want to welcome him in on the phone. Alykhan, let's start here with the last 24 hours. How much of Harden's behavior really pushed Rafael Stone to make this deal happen today?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it's something that's been brewing for a while. We saw what happened before the start of training camp. We saw what happened initially in the first few days of training camp. And talking with DeMarcus Cousins today in his media availability, he said this whole unhappiness, all these things that was going on, occurred even well before yesterday's interview post-game. We saw that on the court. There were moments where, as teammates, you will talk to your teammates in an animated way to be able to find an understanding on the court. But there were moments where you could see there was some tension going on. It just, with the lack of preparation, with the shortened season, with the shortened training camp, all those things going on, and him not being able to be there at the start of training camp, it really put the Rockets a step behind other teams, and especially with a new head coach and a new franchise, at establishing chemistry and teamwork on the floor.
Based on all of that, coupled with how talented we know James Harden is, what was your read on how much interest there was league-wide for James Harden?
When you always have a chance to get an arguably top 5 player in the league, you're going to do it. And I think there are a lot of teams interested. And I think it comes down to, are you willing to give up assets that the Rockets want to put your team in a contending conversation? And what the Rockets wanted, they wanted a young cornerstone player. They wanted multiple draft picks and assets, and they wanted multiple young guys. If we look at what they got back, they got 4 unprotected first-round picks. They got 4 unprotected draft swaps, which is exactly the kind of haul they wanted from a draft perspective. And then with how the trade worked out, getting Karras and then having him reroute to Indiana, you bring in a guy of Victor Oladipo that you can take a rental year on, essentially, and see how he meshes alongside John Wall, who's still under contract for multiple seasons after this, and see what that fit is like on the court. I think both of them really do complement each other well. So it'll be interesting to see what happens for the rest of the season and that partnership between John Wall and Victor Oladipo.
So while the Rockets will bank on getting draft assets for years, which Houston has not had because of the wheeling and dealing of Daryl Morey, who's now moved on to Philadelphia, they also get Victor Oladipo, as you mentioned, but he is going to be a free agent at the end of this season. This summer, he will be have the ability to go anywhere he wants. Do they need to retain him in order for this to be a successful trade?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's going to be all about how that partnership works with him and John Wall. At this point in time, when James Harden was here, Stephen Silas wanted to have a 3-man rotation as a primary ball handler with Eric Gordon, James Harden, and John Wall. Now, without James Harden, you're going to slide in Victor Oladipo, and it's going to be interesting to see how they all mesh together. Silas's offense is all about 5-out, interchangeability, ball movement, getting the offense going, and allowing their defense to play into their offense as well. You bring in a guy who's great defensively in Victor Oladipo, who's showing that he can come back and play, hopefully to a level where he was previously for them. Then you give that team, if you're the Rockets, you give your team a chance to be successful on both ends with having a team that can play off each other like that. You're going to see a lot more of John Wall with the basketball, allowing him to play in his strength, which is pick and roll with Christian Wood, and then having Victor Oladipo come off those off-ball actions, something that was not going well for the Rockets early on this season.
Your colleague at The Athletic, Kelly Iko, is tweeting out about teams calling Rafael Stone about the availability of P.J. Tucker, who is on the final deal of a $7 million contract. What is your take on how willing Houston would be to move on from really the guy that's been their source of toughness and defense the last couple of years?
Yeah, and that's not a surprise. Teams have been calling about P.J. Tucker for the last season or two. When Mike D'Antoni was here, Mike D'Antoni relayed to P.J. Tucker after his first season here that, as long as Mike was going to be the head coach in Houston, PJ would also be here as well. And PJ's been here for a while. He lives with his family here. I mean, he wanted a contract extension even before the season started, going back to last season, as, like you said, my colleague Kelly Iko reported as well. It's going to be interesting to see what happens between now and the trade deadline. PJ Tucker, even though he's in his mid-30s, is a great defensive player, somebody who can knock down the corner three at a great rate. If you play him that 20 to 30-minute range and allow him to feast off the bench or as a starter and play in those small ball lineups, you give your team an extra piece of versatility to be able to do things on both ends. And I think a lot of teams who are contending will be calling Rafael Stone these next few weeks up until the trade deadline to see what it takes for them to get PJ Tucker.
Well, lastly, I want to finish up with this by getting someone's perspective who is embedded in the culture of Houston and understands Rocket basketball the way you do. How will James Harden be viewed as a Rocket after this latest saga, coupled with the relative success he had keeping the Rockets in the Western Conference race for as long as he did, but not winning a championship?
James Harden's an 8-time All-Star, former MVP. He's the second best player in Rockets franchise history. He's been an MVP player. He's led the Rockets to the playoffs in each of his 8 seasons, and in 5 of the last 7, they've gone past the first round. He's brought a consistent winning mentality to Houston. They've always been a contending team, and he should be viewed as that, somebody who put this franchise back on the map when they were going through that rebuilding stage after those injuries to Tracy McGrady and Yao Ming, where the team was recouping assets trying to see if they could flip it for a star, and they landed on one in James Harden. And now you go look back at those 8 years, you look at a guy who was contending alongside the Golden State Warriors, somebody who took them to the limit, potentially could have won a championship, in the 2017-2018 season. There's a lot of positives to look at from this for him and his Rockets tenure, and he will go down as the second best player in franchise history.
I guess just ahead of our beloved Charles Barkley in terms of great pocket. Alykhan Bijani, we appreciate all your insight. Great work covering the Rockets for The Athletic. Let's bring back in Isaiah Thomas and Dennis Scott here for your thoughts on what is the end of a